The world is on fire, and young men are looksmaxxing or playing video games, or they're just tapping out. What is going on? Well, you see, we have a whole generation of young men with nothing left to live for, okay? They work more hours than medieval peasants, are paid less, they're on track to never being able to buy a house. Houses, homes, family homes, 30 minutes outside of Denver are like $1 million. On top of that, 80% of my generation of young men aren't in relationships. Marriage rates are steeply declining. There's no more community. There's no more God. There's no more shared sense of religious purpose or purpose otherwise. There's no unifying vision or aim for the West. We're just drifting in this sea of nihilism. And this is a really bad deal. You see, when men have nothing left to live for, and more specifically, nothing left to fight for, what do? They're going to check out. They're going to go through the motions of life, play video games, eat shitty food, do drugs on the weekend, and watch sports. Or as a reaction to that, the self-improvement space opens up, which is really the last frontier available to them, to men, which is themselves. But again, this takes on the same kind of vain and selfish undertones because they have no unifying purpose that brings them together and makes them feel like they're a citizen of something larger. And when this idea of citizenship collapses, so does a healthy republic and healthy masculinity. And in this video, I want to talk about the founding fathers' conception of a healthy republic, specifically Thomas Jefferson's conception of a healthy republic, and how healthy republics and healthy masculinity have existed in places like ancient Greece, in Rome, during the Enlightenment, during times of flourishing in humanity, and what can we learn from history about this. Welcome back to Wisdom Warriors. I'm Christian. We're diving in today. So Thomas Jefferson and many of our founding fathers were wise figures that studied the classics, they studied history, and they determined that a healthy republic exists on 3 foundation stones, and that is private land ownership, participation in self-governance, and virtue under God. These 3 things are indispensable in individuals if the republic is going to thrive. And I find this very fascinating because these are not like wide sweeping party legislations. These are about the individual. And I totally agree with this. If we want a healthy nation, if we want healthy communities, we need healthy men and women, right? And to make strong men and women again, you need to have them be a citizen, a participant in the whole. This is the essential piece that Thomas Jefferson understood. The first one is private land ownership, okay? When you own the land, when you own, let's say, a couple acres in a community, and you know that your children's children are probably going to live there, how do you take care of that piece of land? You're probably going to want to see it thrive. You're going to really take care of your house. On top of that, you're going to take care of your neighbors because you know their kids' are going to be there too. Right? You take care of your whole community. You have this sense of a stake in the world and citizenship. So therefore, your time frame of thinking has extended very far. And this is the opposite of what happens in a renter society. I'm just renting this apartment. Everyone else is just renting these apartments and houses. No one's owning houses anymore. And when this happens, your time frame of thinking shortens because I'm not going to be here in a year. No one else is going to be here in a year. Why would I care to get to know my neighbors? There's no sense of like long-term value. So therefore, it's very short-term, self-absorbed thinking. And this is what's happening across the world right now is the private land is being bought up by conglomerates and it's making everyone else become basically peasants again, where there's no more middle class. You can't really buy a home if you're making an average salary. So everyone's renting things and then thinking really short term. And it's why community is disintegrating because no one has private land ownership anymore. And this is actually how the early Roman Republic fell. is all of a sudden they started importing large amounts of slaves, which destroyed the middle class because there's an overproduction of labor. And then the wealth pump got turned on, basically where the middle class became very poor. They lost ownership of their lands, and then conglomerates came in and bought all the farms and lands from the people, right? And it created this massive inequality where people no longer felt like they were citizens of Rome. They were either peasants or very wealthy upper class, right? And when the citizenship, the middle class falls away, that's when nations collapse. Okay, and this is what we're seeing in America. This is what we're seeing all over the West right now, is the loss of private land ownership. And the first thing to feel like you're a citizen, a part of something, is to have a long-term stake in something. I once lived on a community farm, and I didn't give a shit about the garden, about the farm. Like, I really wanted to participate more. But the problem is I knew I was transient. I knew that I didn't own a single scrap of that land. So why would I really care about it? And this is what, everyone needs to understand about human psychology is unless we have stake in something, there's no value. There's just going to be a tragedy of the commons. The final 2 points here is participation in self-governance and virtue, or virtue under God. And both of these I'm going to go into really briefly so we can actually get to a big segment of this video, which is about frontiers. But both of these create group cohesion and a shared sense of trust and feeling with one another in a community. And they increase this feeling of citizenship. Participation in self-governance, the founding fathers had this conception that each local government and state government would have a lot more power than the federal government. The federal government was this overseer to protect the borders of the nation, essentially. And in that, if you were in this small town and you felt like your political ideas, your values actually had this ripple effect and this sway through the community, you were much more likely to be engaged and active in your community, help people out, educate, spread ideas, and it created this sense of an involved citizen. We can even go back to ancient Athens to have evidence of this, is the aristocratic elites and the people who could vote would often get together in symposiums. And symposiums were dinner parties where these men would get together to drink wine and discuss philosophy, politics, war, religion, things like that. And it often came down to heated debate. And I always admire the Greek Athenians for their intellectual prowess and their sense of involvement in their city. They loved their city. They loved Athens, and they wanted to see the best of it. And many of them were outspoken philosophers. They thought deeply about politics. They thought deeply about war and protecting their borders. They thought deeply about trade and, religion and God and virtue and these things that actually founded a healthy republic. And their ideas spread through debate, through these symposiums, and it created this really active citizen. And I think the founding fathers of America had a similar idea when they emphasized participation in small self-governance. The third thing is virtue. And Rome collapsed largely because of the wealth inequality, the disenfranchised lower class, but also because of this discordant loss of group values. You see, when the main religion goes away, all of a sudden this group sense of cohesion goes away with it, because religion historically has always been the center of a tribe, the center of a community. Why is that? Because your worship and your morality, when it's shared, you have a much more familiar and kindred sense with the people around you. You speak the same language. You're on the same spiritual quest, per se, as everyone else. And right now, everyone I see is basically following different religions, whether they know it or not, whether that's scientism or wokeism or republicanism or, whatever it is. People have their own ideologies, and it's creating and we're creating this loss of shared value and loss of shared language and loss of cultural identity. So these three things, private land ownership, participation in self-governance, and virtue under a religion of some kind, like a state religion, when these things collapse, cultural cohesion, sense of citizenship, and sense of participation in a larger whole all go away. So what happens is you get a very hedonistic, nihilistic, divided populace that only focuses on themselves. There's no more neighbors. There's no more community. There's nothing greater to fight for. So men just go inward. They go through the motions of their lives. In walks the self-improvement space to all these, frankly, very hurting and very disconnected men who are disconnected from their roots. And it's no wonder that these men, get obsessed about the gym and meditation and studying and improving themselves. Good for them. Like, this is the last frontier available to them. And also in this broken world, in order to maybe have a chance at building a family, of having some kind of financial freedom, of having a good life, you do have to be a self-improver. That's just the bottom line. But at the same time, it takes on this selfish undertone. And that brings us to the second part of this video, and that is self-improvement should be and usually is the byproduct of the conquest of frontiers. So let's talk about frontiers and how it develops healthy masculinity. Frontiers is about mastery of open spaces, new spaces to master. And frontiers appear in many places. They can appear in the science world, especially during the Enlightenment. All these new scientists wanted to go master the new spaces, wanted to go observe the stars and do these kinds of things. Frontiers can be in the art world. They can be in the business world. They can be physical space. Wherever there is space to conquer, new spaces to master, masculinity flourishes. And men tend to band together in brotherhoods. You can think about it as the tribe, and there's all this unknown open territory around the tribe. Men will join hunting bands or war bands to go explore the surrounding areas and master, their natural environment. This also happens in terms of conquest. We see every single culture, from the Native Americans to the Huns to the Indo-European barbarians, going into new spaces and conquering new lands. And through doing this, they develop, skills as a tribe. They develop internal resources as individuals. And flourishing always occurs where there's a frontier and something new, some new space to go master. We saw this in ancient Athens. After the Athenians defeated the ancient Persians, all of a sudden their navy swept across the Mediterranean, and they mastered all of these new spaces. They mastered the seas. And through acquiring all this expansion, right, they created the Athenian Golden Age. The same thing happened in Great Britain, post the age of exploration, where all these men wanted to go adventure and master the new spaces, the open seas, the new territories. And there was this period of colonialism. And whether that was good or bad, there was this flourishing of culture in England, and earlier than that in Portugal, in France, in these places where they were expanding and mastering new spaces. In every culture that was really flourishing, we see this expansion of physical space and also the expansion of intellectual or business frontiers. The idea of a frontier is really important because this is where masculinity thrives. The wilderness is a perfect example to show where masculinity thrives. There's a reason that rites of passage and men's work or men's development happened with elder men out in the forest. Boys were taken out there to face the dangers and wildness of open space, where they had to learn, self-reliance, industriousness, courage in the face of danger, strength in the face of adversity. They had to learn these things before they could come back to the safe village. And right now in the West, we have lost the wilderness per se. So many men have never really been in the wilderness, and they haven't receive these pseudo wildernesses, let's say, of, this thriving business frontier or this thriving creative intellectual scientific frontier. And because there's no frontiers left to them, there's nowhere to catch the heroic impulse. Most men who have masculinity left in their blood have this heroic impulse towards going into something new, taking a great adventure in their life and building something in the face of adversity. It's why we love heroic stories and superheroes and all these things growing up as boys, is we have these dreams of, I'm going to be a billionaire. I'm going to be a pioneer. I'm going to be an explorer. I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm going to go into these dangerous open spaces and make a name for myself. And as they grow up, all of a sudden these heroic sparks, I call them, don't have any kindling to take hold of. So no flames are started. And this is the stifling of the modern West right now, is the business frontier, for the most part, has been explored and conquered unless you're very specialized. Same thing with science and academia. Is like the amount of specialization to get to the fringes of AI technology or space technology is takes a very specific type of person. Furthermore, physical space and frontiers and wilderness, there are some left, like if you go up to Alaska, but the physical frontier is basically gone as well. And what happens when there's no more open spaces for our young men? Well, they're going to turn to video games where they can actually level up with friends, where there is space to conquer, space to master, and skills to gain. They can have this real sense of progress. Or they turn to something like self-improvement and personal development. You see, when all space externally seems to be conquered, men with masculinity left in them will go to the last true frontier, and that is themselves. And this is a very isolating experience because the development of spirituality, of going to the gym, of reading more, of developing yourself, yes, it's very virtuous, but at the same time, there's this question of like, what is all of this for? If there's nothing externally, no motivating, unifying purpose for all the self-improvement, it can feel really vain. So that's one of the reasons I'm making this video, is because I sense there's a lot of young men out there who are getting into self-improvement, who are getting obsessed with the gym, and like, kudos for you. Keep going, go master that frontier that is you. But at the same time, we need some kind of unifying collective vision if it's going to be more meaningful. And also if it's going to be less selfish and less vain. I get it. If you're not getting girls, like, get into the gym more or like learn to approach, do that kind of thing. But at the same time, that still feels so base. And for many men, money and looks are not big enough motivators to become their best self. Like, we need some kind of unifying religion or collective vision that we're going towards. We need a new frontier, and this is so important. The last frontiers I see, I encourage you to comment below what frontiers you see for you. But the internet is quickly being explored and conquered. But at the same time, there are niches like the one I'm entering now that are available to people who really want to rise up as rising men, as leaders. There are frontiers available. Also, on the ideological front, there's many frontiers here. Because there's great thinkers like Nietzsche, like Julius Evola, some people that I really, appreciate, that barely have any ideological backers. And there's so many backers in the mainstream partisanship of like Republican or Democrat or right or left. But there's also this huge ideological frontier where, leaders are going to need to rise into and actually start to establish themselves so that we can spread this kind of information and education and start a new culture and a new movement towards something beautiful. So I guess I'm going to leave you not necessarily with a solution, but a question. Is what is a frontier? You and your brothers, your comrades, the high value individuals you find out here, what is a frontier that you can organize yourself around? By finding a frontier and going into it, you develop your masculinity, but you also become a leader. And leaders and great movements, revolutions, new cultures, flourishing happens on frontiers primarily, because frontiers demand the highest vision, the highest responsibility, and the highest group cohesion. This feeling of group cohesion, which we all crave, it can only happen when there's an us versus them, when there's this great, external adversary, whether it's ideological, physical, intellectual, when there's this great adversary that we must band together to overcome. That's all I got to say here. I think this is the solution to building a healthy republic and healthy men again. Thanks for watching Wisdom Warriors. Hit that subscribe button if you want more like this. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Peace.